Okay, now that we've got our database set up, what we're going to do next is configure identity. So earlier on we created in our API, in our extensions, we created an application service extensions for things that we didn't want to clutter inside our startup class. And what we're going to do is do the same thing but for identity services, because this can become quite wordy and verbose, and this is just something else that we can put inside an extension method and then add to our startup class. So what we'll do is we'll create a new C# class in the extensions folder, and we'll say identity service extensions and press return. And once again, this is going to be a static method because it's going to be, or a static class because it's going to be an extension method. So what we'll do is we'll say public static, and we're going to return an iService collection just as we did before, and we're going to call this one add identity services. And because it's an extension, we need to say this as in what are we extending, and we're extending the iService collection here, and we'll call this services. And what we'll also need is the iConfiguration, because we're going to need access to our configuration at some point during this as well. So we'll say config for this one, and we'll just bring in both of these. And be careful with the iConfiguration. Automapper uses iConfiguration as well, but we want to get this from Microsoft Extensions configuration. And we also need to bring in using Microsoft Extensions dependency injection as well. And okay, and let's move this down. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to say services, and what we want to add is the identity core. And this adds and configures the identity system for the specified user type. And role services are not added by default, but can be added if we want to. We're only interested in the user stuff at the moment. So we're going to say add identity core, and then specify app user as the user type. And we'll also need to bring in domain to make use of this. And we need to give this some configuration options, or we can do. And I'll just show you what options we have to configure inside here. So if we take a look at opt and then press a period, then we can see all of the different things that we can configure using these options. And I'll just give you a quick example. So for example, ASP.NET Identity requires a complex password. It requires a lowercase, an uppercase, a non-alphanumeric character, as well as a number. And if you wanted to change any of those, then you can specify opt password, and I'm just going to say require non-alphanumeric equals false. So we'll only insist on users supplying a number, a lowercase and uppercase letter, for example. Configure this however you want. And then what we'll do is we'll say add entity framework stores, and this registers our user stores and our role stores with our application. And we need to specify our data context as the type here. And we'll need to bring in using a persistence to use this. And we'll also add a sign-in manager. And we'll specify sign-in manager as the type. And we need to pass in the app user once again for this. And let's see what we need to bring in. We need to bring in Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity. And what we also need to do inside here, we need to specify services, and we need to say add authentication in order to get access to the sign-in manager when we need it. We'll come back and configure more inside our authentication a bit later, but this is the bare minimum that we need to do just to get identity functional in our application. And then we can return services from here. And with this in place, what we can do is we can go across to our startup class. And what we can do is just below the add application services, we can say services and add identity services, and we can pass in the config. And this takes care of the basic identity configuration. And what we'll take a look at next is how we can add some seed users so that we can see that our current configuration is actually working. And we'll take a look at that next.